Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Nero nero.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Chi ha l'energia giusta sceglie di non sprecarla.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli, perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Chi ha l'energia giusta sceglie di non sprecarla. Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli. Chi ha l'energia giusta sceglie di non sprecarla.
Era 28 luglio 29, perché quando prendiamo le chiavi è vuota, quindi poi c'è tutta la fase affascinante di volontari. Sarebbe bello una volta portarsi facilmente, ma durante la fase di allestimento avere i ragazzi che hanno molto messo in realtà fanno parecchi
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buonasera.
Good evening, welcome everybody. Welcome to those who are in the room in Rimini in the Fiera and those who are following us remotely in streaming or who will follow us on demand. First, before greeting our guest, who I have the honor and also a bit of reverential fear to present to you, I'd like to greet all our friends. It was the third day of this 44th edition of the meeting with the title, The Human Existence is an Inexhaustible Friendship. I'll greet also the many authorities who are present here in the hall, and let's get a start on our encounter. First of all, thanking and greeting for his presence a guest who's not the first time he's come to the meeting, but the Undersecretary of the Presidency of the Council of Ministers, the Right Honourable Alfredo Mantovano. Thank you. Thank you for having accepted our invitation. Thank you for having come back again to meet us once again. And I hope you've had a chance to see, I believe you've been to see some of the pavilions of the Fiera and see what's been here. And this moment of chat, of dialogue that we're going to have is because we've decided to indicate as a title, this one, What is Changing in Italy? It's not a generic title because we're going to refer to the fact that we're coming from years certainly very complex, that we've all lived in the first years of COVID and then the last year with a crisis of energy, particularly that's significant. And we're living in a not simple moment with regard to family, etc. And as has been said before, a period of change of epoch. And this change of epoch that was discussed even just after the meeting last year, we had a change of government. So more or less 10 months ago, the new government came in, which, so we'll start straight away with the questions, what initially was looked at with a bit of suspicion, perhaps, this government, from the international media, with the preoccupation that there might be a political actor that was perhaps to be feared, and in consequence, in the international media, they painted a picture of that was quite worrying, in contrast to what actually was happening in the development of the country. So 10 months after, it seems that this image, this reputation, this positioning of Italy at the international level isn't quite the same as it was 10 months ago. And so, first of all, I'll ask you if effectively this change of consideration, what's happened to make this change? So, firstly, thank you for the invitation, for the director of the meeting, Emmanuele, and I thank you all for being here. And also, I greet all the authorities who are present and all of you, the friends here, who many of you have known for many years. So, what's happened and what's happening when you meet a person when somebody's spoken ill of you and you meet somebody? If this person if they don't have prejudices, this person, that aren't insurmountable, the person who's listening to you, he'll grasp that the good sense and reasonableness will prevail, and the stories that have been recounted about you, that they understand those, and you become an ever more trustworthy partner. So, what are outside these personal things that go into relationship between the leaders of state and of government, which aren't a second-level factor, but what are the factors that, above all, I think, have contributed to this change of opinion at an international level with regard to the Meloni government? I think we could pick out the principal ones. First would be that this government is perceived as a stable government, destined to endure along the lines of the legislature. And so these things are important because it's happened to President Meloni at the beginning of her meetings with other world leaders, and to grasp in the interlocutor that maybe in 10 months, when you meet them again, that it's the same person. And obviously this perspective of seeing that person again is decisive for constructing a journey together. And second factor that is above all useful for Europe, which we've never put in discussion, the Europeanism, insofar as, despite many critics claimed about us, if we decline our belonging, look at our belonging to Europe in a way that isn't neither supine nor bureaucratic, but we are in the European institutions, we're aware of their limits and the conditionings that they determine about how they can work and the individual states that belong to the Union, but aware also of the opportunities that the Union offers without inferiority complexes, ready to not yield with what you might look at the objectives. Third point, we have never put in discussion the international alliances which we are respecting, notwithstanding the sacrifices that this asks of Italy. And it's altogether, I'm thinking about the war in Ukraine. That's obviously important. The support that we give to Ukraine is not just in terms of sharing of a military alliance, but it's a support that has been made concrete without a huge media echo in the starting out and internal civilian help, and also that civil society helped in Italy. To ways to guarantee our energy sufficiency of that of the Ukrainian people. Getting started, we've got some ways to bring this to fulfillment. We're very busy in this direction. We can talk about the success of the Italian genius with our collaboration in the Triennial of Milan with Maxine and his president and the Ministry of the Culture and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We're looking to reconstruct, thanks to the Italian architects and the excellence of Italian architects, the Cathedral of Odessa. There are already some contacts going on with the city of Odessa, and all this is a sign of a continuing presence in that area, which is so difficult. Sure, from that area came some heavy impacts on the life of Italy and in the life of many of those who are supporting this coalition, above all in terms of energy provision and the prices of raw materials, which compared to what they were before the conflict, there's a huge increase. But this is making us grasp the factors of the crisis, the elements of opportunity. This is making us open ever more to the south of the Mediterranean. In these months, this has contributed to the growth of the international credibility of Italy. It's brought us to closen our links with Algeria, with Libya, the so-called TARP, which has been held hostage at the time of its start today, is, thanks to SAIPEM, is aimed at providing the European nations of Central Europe, Austria and others, Germany, and Italy has started off an initiative almost of sort of après-piste for the other European nations towards Africa, maybe off-piste. We've done, and I'll talk about this later perhaps. These are some of the elements according to which we can talk about, which Italy was sort of thought of the margins of the European, maybe more outside than inside the Union, but now it's been it seems more that thought had little behind it. I will go back soon to the international themes, but first I'd like to ask you a different thing, looking at towards within our own borders, which some of the observers, coming back to the beginning of this path we're talking about, some of these observers doubted that a new government like this with a representation that seemed maybe without much experience of managing the public affairs could be able to lead a nation. And so it could be in some way, was it able to deal with such complex challenges? And beyond that even, beyond it, before even seeing the actions that were done. So what is the method of the working method that you needed to imprint on this situation? So among my tasks, there's that of being Undersecretary of the Council of Ministers, and I can attest that the work we've done so far within that council has been very unified, very unanimous, and it's been a question of an intense preparation, which managed to loosen some knots that on the technical or political side that were perhaps there. And so the meetings of the council were never very long, not because we didn't discuss anything, but because many questions came to the meeting already well defined, or it was already clear what was essential. But there's also a method of work that we've started off, really to go back to your question, that I think in Rome I have comes perhaps from an experience in a previous role in the government, which I was as Undersecretary for the Internal Affairs, and in the last period in which I had this role, I had as a minister Roberto Maroni, and with Maroni at the beginning of that legislature and that experience of government, we found ourselves needing to face some really tricky knots, some tricky problems, particularly the presence of the Camorra and the clans. There we realized, we tried out a method that like Christopher Columbus might attest, until you try, it doesn't stand up. So this consisted in picking out time to time the interested subjects, and sometimes that was the Carabinieri, the police, the judicial authorities, but that picking out the objectives, the apprehension of the goods that were illicitly gained, etc., and in returning to the particular place after 15 or 20 days to verify if those objectives were reached, if there was something else to review concretely. So not that everybody can do what they want, but making more systematic the way of governing. And this stuck with me this way, because at that point it brought us up to really dismantling these clans and capturing some of the many leaders, the most dangerous people there. And I tried to reproduce this same method now in the current experience of government. So, for instance, in the necessary works for the Jubilee. The Jubilee could start tomorrow, 24th of December. It was almost like it seems tomorrow that it's going to start. And what needs to be done to make it possible that the presence of the pilgrims can be as easy as possible. And so with the mayor of Rome, who, as you know, was previously had been nominated to the Jubilee organization, it's all now habitual to meet up every couple of weeks to review the works that are going from right from the start of them being planned, to see how they're going on, and then look at the execution phase. And in this way, over a few months, the work's starting, which unfortunately in these months will cause a bit of disruption in the life of the capital, more than that might be already there from traffic works, etc. And so at the start of the Jubilee will permit a more easy way for people to move around, and a more decorous welcoming to the pilgrims. So think of first aid posts and etc. All the system of welcoming that we'll need. So the same method we're also following for the organization of the Olympics. And we're following the theme of employment and anti-drug measures. So the problems are complex, but often we're putting together the different skills of different people. You can't let their you can't leave definitions just to a circulated document. We need to meet together, need to look at each other, above all, to bring out the difficulties, then it can happen to resolve them, and then make some more steps ahead. Thank you. I think that even on this method, many times, leaving the meeting is a bit like this. We collaborate together and everyone can contribute to the common good. So it's interesting to see how this can proceed with this method. But I want to go back one step to the international scenario, because the first step, the first thing the government put at the centre was to confront the Africa issue. And so back in June in Rome, there was an international conference on development and immigration. And so there were many representatives and heads of state from the Mediterranean, from the Gulf and Central Africa. It was for some aspects was unprecedented. And so this ended up with the Mattei plan. So it'd be interesting to understand in what this plan consists and how it will develop.
Africa is our present and it's our future. Those of us as Italians and us as Europeans. Not only for the question of migration, it's also our future because of a question of energy provision. And also, moreover, I don't need to list the many reasons of our proximity with Africa. It is also for the prevention of terrorism, of jihadist terrorism, which is one of these subjects which every now and again comes back around and then disappears again. So jihadist terrorism exists, it's real. There are entire areas of the African world that right now are submitted to this. A huge part, a country like Nigeria, consistently sees large parts of its own territory under the dominion of Boko Haram, which institutes conditions like similar to slavery upon that population, and especially upon young women, who are frequently raped, abducted, and are victims of all kinds of violence. And this is just a common expression of jihadist policy. Italy has a long tradition and a modern political will to stand in front of Africa in a credible manner, because it's not seen as a country which has as long of a colonial or post-colonial relationship with Africa. I'll clarify what I mean. Starting from the conference on the 23rd of July, which happened in La Farnesina, and which saw the representation of 5 heads of state, 8 heads of government, and for those for whom neither of those two are present, had the presence of other authoritative people. In this case, of the whole southern area of Europe, everywhere from Turkey, going all the way down until arriving in Morocco, including the Gulf countries, including some African countries with whom it's possible in these days to establish negotiations. Though added to these, the EU, that was represented by the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, and the President of the Commission, Michel, and a whole series of international organizations such as the UN and various banks and financial entities. So talking about countries, they have 3 levels. There's countries from where immigrants come, transit countries, and the destinations for migrants, which, mostly speaking, are the ones that will give creating the plan for Africa. So in what does it consist? In two rails that have to run in a parallel fashion. Firstly, an effective and concrete development of Africa. And the secondly is the regulation of flows of migration. when I talk about a non-colonial or not post-colonial agreement, it means that the attitude of Italy, which has shared its table, hasn't been one like recently the media has been talking about, that it's been taken lightly, because you don't conclude forced negotiations with a document signed by everyone with a common agreement. There were countries there which aren't fast friends, and yet after an intense work of diplomacy, they were able to reach the same conclusions. So I say that's not a colonial, but saying not a colonial agreement means that the decisions for single African states aren't taken up in Brussels or in Rome or in Turin, but they're shared with the states themselves. So it's not something that comes down from on high. It's something that's agreed with Mauritania, with Guinea, and with all the other countries in Africa, with the Central African Republic, with whom we've been having these negotiations. I've been saying Italy has a tradition in this sense, and there's no need to unnecessarily underline it. But even it has the political will right now, and right now it's able to act concretely. It can confirm that it's not been a forced negotiation. It's not been a diktat. We've now been creating a common fund to develop Africa. And the United Arab Emirates have shown their willingness to step in this direction, investing into this fund the first 100 million euros. And when there's money on the table, that's when we start entering into a concrete discussion and you stop being generic. Concreteness means making sure that the work we're doing, that the various cooperation projects for the development of Italy are made coherent, are tied together with all their objectives. And as such, we avoid random interventions that are sporadic or that are fragmented. It's also a creation of more jobs there and more jobs here for migrants who intend to come legally and work. These aren't just words. A few weeks ago, it was published, and it will start to be, it will be operative very soon, the Flussi decree in Italy, which for the first time is a triennial decree, which will allow the arrival over the 3 years of 450,000 foreigners to arrive in Italy, who will come in a completely regular, legal fashion, and will create a pathway. This could be the antidote. It must be our antidote and our solution, which will make these merchants of death lose money, and it will make the whole process more regular. And as far as the Flussi decree is concerned, there's the possibility of an extra quota outside of entry for whatever aspiring worker who lives in any African state, not only Africa, but not also Africa, but we talk specifically about this. Whichever worker can have their training paid for by an Italian network of businesses. So we've been talking about this for many years, and I think Flussi now can now bring people to my business who I need. I don't know what what skills these workers have, but the most adequate response is train these people there, or refer yourself to an entity that you trust to train them, and that's the best way to bring people in without a quota. Whatever workers are trained and willing to work. And lastly, but not finally, we want to involve, and we were talking about privately recently with Emmanuele about this work, the third sector, which already is undergoing an important operation and which needs to be brought together and not to lose its own autonomy or its own the specifics of its own work, but to increase efficiency of its own actions. Described like this, it seems all like sunshine and rainbows, but we're talking about walking on a minefield here. It's very difficult. Africa right now is probably the most vast and tragic land than that which is similar to what was Pope Francis was talking about recently, and what Zuppi re-proposed here at the meeting as basically Third World War in small pieces. Russia fights in Africa. Part of the war in Ukraine is fought in Africa, trying to remove Western interests of those who are opposed, of the Western nations opposed to Russia and Ukraine. For example, through the use of the Wagner company. Wagner isn't a set of one company, it's a network. There's some smaller societies based within it, and normally contractors, these armed fighters, they're set to train. They're trained by industries that are those involved in the extractive industries of diamonds, of oil, and this helps increase trafficking and illegal activities. So there's huge levels of difficulty here. Even those outside of Russia, there are the internal issues within individual African countries. The civil war in Niger is much bigger than Russia and Wagner PMC, and it could be true that these two entities will later profit from the situation by inserting themselves later. But there are crises started recently that we've forgotten about. Who talks on the media now about Sudan? And yet, you know, it's only been 5 months since the beginning of the civil war there. Among the issues, there's a certain rigidity of certain international organizations, not to name but a few, the IMF, which even now is withdrawing there are issues with over $1 billion worth of IMF funds due for Tunisia that have been withdrawn, saying that Tunisia first needs to guarantee human rights, and now we're allowing ourselves to look on, where if you're not in a condition to pay your public servants, among whom there are also policemen, you're not incapable of guaranteeing public safety. And we can see what happens where in all the cities from which large numbers of boats depart from, full of migrants, they're not able to maintain security there. And it's difficult to unblock this impasse without even counting the extent of the Chinese influence in the region, because these countries, if they can't find any help of the realities which find themselves closer to the West, such as in the Western sphere, like the IMF, if they can't get help from there, they look for somewhere else, and that's a help that isn't really of the most recommendable partnerships that a country can have as far as the West is concerned, but even towards the interests of those same countries. There's obviously many other difficulties, but to list difficulties doesn't mean that we renounce the path that we've set ourselves on. And so let me to conclude here that what I don't think is just a digression. Fleeing from issues isn't a part of our Christian culture. I'm talking about the cultural and civil pillars of Christian civilization. A God who becomes man means that salvation doesn't come through doesn't happen by slaloming through difficulties, but rather by taking them on and being their part of their solution. When in Europe the construction of the European project was made to fail without fully despite the even though John Paul II at the time was espousing the necessity of Christian civilization at that time, people have forgotten the need for Europe, because if Europe has acquired an identity, or is just a Western appendage of Asia, after the fall of the Roman Empire, it's because in Europe for centuries, the hearts and minds were always were nourished by ora et labora. This is the one unifying force from Lisbon to Bucharest. I should say from Lisbon to St. Petersburg. And if now, 80 years after the end of the Second World War, war has returned in such a tragic way to Europe, and along with many other additional causes, it also means they've now rejected this unifying element that used to be present. For us, that's the magnet that binds together our plan for Africa.
Grazie. Anche per...
Thank you also because the question for those who are linked, there's a lot of applause going on. I thank you also because the point that you've just brought up is also a delicate point, which is that one of the conflict with the mafia here at the meeting, but right since the start. There's always been the theme of even the more delicate themes like that one of the mafia, starting for testimonies, starting from extraordinary people, but extraordinary people within a daily life. Like last year, you remember very well, we had the exhibition on Beato Livatino, and this time we've got one on the extraordinary figure of Don Pino Pugliese and Aldo Moro. And on our side, let's say within the meeting, there's always been a great attention really to underline this last aspect which you quoted. There's a theme which also deals with institutions with regard to the anti-mafia efforts, which was that President Meloni has often underlined herself. What are the actions that they're doing, and what are the useful ones, given in the light of the cultural position that you've just described? So there are some themes which, in some moments in our history as Italians, have had a big weight in the media. So like the anti-mafia work against jihadist terrorism, these themes, and then mysteriously they disappear. Like we said before, they're no longer trending. But now they don't disappear in the work of the police forces, in justice, and in the government and the parliament. And so even if they aren't in the media fashion, they are in concrete terms part of our daily tasks. So the struggle against the mafia continues with the following of objectives, historic objectives like the capturing of the leaders, and we need to give honor to those who have made it possible to capture the last important leader of the mafia. With what spirit do we face this side of the government's actions? With an awareness that we are not at year zero. We must be proud as Italians of the fact that the work that's been done in the last 30 years, let's thinking back to the massacres of '92, this was unequaled in the world on the plan of the levels of effective action, on the level of the results that have been achieved. So Cosa Nostra in Sicily is no longer that thing that was 30 years ago. It exists, it's dangerous, it must be struggled against, but must be opposed, but its power is much less devastating than it was. An analogous discussion, we could think about the Camorra, and they happened in many places, but the homicides, which is clearly a terrible thing, is an expression of power, let's say. In the language of the mafia, it's often the power, the real power, you manifest it when it's calm on the surface. It's completely calm on the surface because you have a dominion over what's going on, and there isn't something. It doesn't necessarily require there's something as dramatic as a homicide. So, criminality, the most preoccupying one is the Ndrangheta, and they still require some results there that we've already had on the other two fronts, and there are some enclaves in the territory in which we're still trying to concentrate our attention because they seem to be abandoned territories, which nobody was caring about. The media doesn't, even the local media, and which instead show that there's criminal effects that are hard to remove. Also, Pugliese, all that which has to do with the Foggia province and the different criminal realities of the mafia sort of type, particularly in the Foggia. But I'll come back to the point that I think is important. In these 30 years, many steps ahead have been taken. You were talking about Livatino. If we compare the instruments, the tools that he had as his disposition from the ministry as a judge, and now what the justice system has at its disposal, the richness it has now, it's the field is incredibly different. Back in Livatino's time, we're not talking 200 years ago, we're talking just a bit more than 30 years ago, there wasn't a legislation on the collaborators. So it wasn't possible to get news from within those criminal organizations. The possibility to take the goods of the mafia was much more difficult then, to confiscate things. Or there wasn't a national anti-mafia direction, and so there were 150 different procuraties around Italy, and collaborating with them amongst them was difficult. And there wasn't this twin rail that we talked of, the restriction of the benefits for those who commit these crimes, mafia crimes, from which follow also a higher level of social security. I think today the frontier is in not ignoring the results we've done, but to look at the steps ahead, striking in a even more incisive way the things that are illicitly perceived. The 29th of September in Palermo, we expect an important conference, an international conference, with the representatives from many, many countries from around the world, in the 20th anniversary of the application of the Convention Against Transnational Criminal Crime, which was signed in Palermo, because Italian will pick up again the fact of being the center of intention in anti-mafia activities. And we'll try and follow everything with attention. I think that it won't constitute just it's not by chance that the first move of that was of a decree which has avoided the effect that were expected by a decision at the time that the Constitutional Court had taken. And the last thing in time is that which preceded the last Council of the Ministers in August. It was those who tried to improve, to heal, saying that was going on in the level of jurisprudence, and wanted to restrict the possibility of using an instrument of investigation of criminal acts. So the work is going on along the path of that which has already been done 30 years ago, but never sleeping on our laurels, never because we need to keep rowing against the current. If we stop for a moment, you'll be dragged away by the current. So the forces of police, the force of justice, they've been working very hard. Thank you.
Arriviamo.
So now we arrive, as maybe you could all try to describe the many different fields that your office has to deal with. And so there's also a pretty long a list of tasks that your role requires. Among these, there are some which maybe you speak of less, but also are really part of your work. So I'm thinking in particular of the intelligence, cybersecurity, which is a theme that's extremely relevant, pertinent, and maybe not looked at in enough depth. So I'd ask you to I'll bring this question together with another, a different couple of aspects of your work. First is that of drug dependency, because looking at the parliamentary report of the anti-drug department from a few weeks ago, there are some really alarming data. In 2022, once again, there was an increase in the percentage of 15 to 19-year-olds who consume drugs, at least one substance in the last year, and that number has increased. This increase is also in the young people who claim to have consumed illicit substances, with a more frequent use from 10.9 to 18%. There's also the economic aspect of all of this. 15 billion euros have been spent on this effort. So I cited 3 efforts that are part of your most delicate work that your office has to look at. So in the light of what we've already discussed, what do you have what do you have in the works for this? So let's start from the easy things. Services and cybersecurity. Services, the most recent law which has regulated the sector goes back to 2007. And the world has changed a lot since then. And 2 key elements are very novel here are the increase of activity that's coming from the financial intelligence and cyber security. These are 2 aspects which are kind of strictly correlated, because we could think of the norms around these services of credit to the virtual consequences, software crimes, etc. And those have brought an increase in the action of the financial intelligence agencies. 2 years ago, under the Draghi government, there was instituted a new National Institute for Cybersecurity. I'll be very brief on this, but everything could be improved. This type of activity is contemporaneously a defensive front, and which is expressed in the Golden Powers exercise to protect certain aspects of particularly Pirelli, and an offensive side, which is that which we use the various instruments of tools of the intelligence agencies. But there's a need that comes out from this, and is the need to be more efficient, to avoid superpositions, to overlaps, to be more functional with respect to the needs of national security, which are ever more sophisticated, ever more varied. Both they need a very focused professionality. So if I were to speak of unification of the secret services, then the conditioned reflexes from the media would be that the government to the right has come, and so they they're typically authoritarian, and so the first thing they're going to do is put more power on secret services. And this one of the light, I think this is a bit of a caricature, let's be honest, because I think one thing is certain, that I've experienced this personally when I was the Minister for the Internal Affairs. Before 27, there was a clear partition between the internal service, which was called SISD, depended from the Viminale, and the external one depended from the Ministry of Defence. And so at the Council of Ministers, there was a little unit that tried to let each one understand what was going on without a great deal of success. The true novelty of the reform for 2007 was the unification of the political leadership of this. So both the internal service and the external service depend on the one entity in the government. So it's not unification yes or no, because, yeah, it's already unified in that sense. So it's not cellularized, sorry. The problem is how to make it so that the activities avoid to look at criteria, whether external or internal, which maybe could have been fair back in the times of the Kingdom of Sardinia, but are no longer relevant. So one thing we started in St. Petersburg, I'll cite the city again, this beautiful city, that has had the opportunity of blocking things in Rimini. A concrete decision was made, and it had some harmful results on the internal. So which agency deals with it? It came from the outside and has effects on the inside. So the criterion that can make this more reasonable without risks of authoritarian issues. And the best antidote to the power of information services security is a control by the Parliament, overview by Parliament. This overview that we already have, and it will be more incisive when the protected and reserved discussion between Parliament and government, the path, so that there can be no anti-democratic ideas going on at all. So that's the easy bit. The drug dependency part, this is the difficult one. So here, again, we're talking about method. I found a world that's full of much generosity, much dedication, but very fragmented. And so with the department and the anti-drug department, we tried to put together the communities, health services, the regions, with a common work that, even in this case, has got periodic meetings and deadlines. So we've met each minister who's got something to say in that area, imposing on them the problems and that they must find the solutions. And so there have been technical discussions. We aim, for example, to refresh the National Fund Against Drugs, which from previous governments was eliminated and turned into something more generic. Now we're trying to, with the Ministry of Health, because even those who is a drug dependence has the right to choice, like anybody who has an illness in Italy. You're not constrained within your own region. But if I can also allow myself, if you want to consider it a digression, the true challenge is the educative one. Those data which are terrible, that you cited, they are terrible data, and that we don't reflect on enough, which in a year, half of the adolescents do at least once. The use of drugs is something that shouldn't let us sleep at night. And so In front of this, the leap of quality is that of education, which means serious prevention, means much increase of messages in adverts and whatever, and even Roberto Mancini gave very generously of his time to help with this, and that's obviously just the start. We're betting on a more widespread presence, more diffused within schools, also thanks to the testimonies which can come from within these communities. But we can't just go to the focus on the reduction of harm, because that means accepting defeat. What does the educative challenge mean? I'll give a concrete example. So much of my life, I wasn't in government. I was a judge, so I go from concrete facts. We all know the tragic story of Pamela Mastropietro. Even though more than 5 years have gone since her death, she was a Roman girl, 18 years old. In 2018, she was killed in Macerata after having suffered a long sexual violence from a Nigerian citizen who then took her to pieces. And I've met more than once the mother of this adolescent. And so in this really terrible, upsetting thing, there is a step which strikes me still more than any other, more than the treatment, dishuman treatment that was done to that by her assassin, who now is in a community that I understand. I've visited it recently and I appreciate it. From this community, she went away without unknown, a little before being killed, and on the road, she was met by a passerby in his car. She didn't have a penny to her name. She needed some money to buy drugs, and he, an Italian adult with a job, finding this 18-year-old girl, by the way, he treats her like a commercial goods. He gives her a bit of money, maybe what she needed to buy the last dose of drugs, and he buys a sexual relationship with her. I don't know if it would have come to end the same way if that guy, looking at the evidence, had accompanied her back to the community, or if he'd had towards her a little bit of piety, a little bit of pity, because, and these are what we call, people in good standing, not drug dealers, and he could have used different way his own freedom. Even on drugs, our approach can't be just ideological or.
Quello che ci interessa realmente non sono I milligrammi in più o in meno.
We're not interested in minor questions of milligrams of dosage or of what's happening here. Ultimately, we're drawing the line on something more important, on the importance of terms such as freedom and of responsibility, prevention, education, and neighborliness. These are the tracks on which we want to move ourselves and on which we are moving. We're currently making progress in that direction. I'd like to thank you because, especially to so transparently and so deeply face these issues, it helps us to further understand them and to judge all these multiple different aspects like freedom, education, responsibility, themes that we're talking about in these days as well, and that we often experience. Unfortunately, we've not got limitless time here, and so I'd like to make you one final question. Easy question here, in the sense that, in the light of everything you've already told us, what is or what are therefore today the the most difficult and the most major challenges, the most interesting ones maybe, or the most difficult ones that are on our horizon. So I don't want to steal Minister Roccella, who will speak soon. I don't want to take her job to talk on exactly on this topic. I'll just simply raise it quickly, but I'll follow on from what the Minister Giorgetti said yesterday. And I'm only talking about this because it's a challenge that doesn't just refer to his ministry or the manager of financial management, but it refers to the entire government. The most important challenge is that of the birth rate, and it's more important than energy supply. It's more important than institutional reform. It's more important than the regulation of migration. Because a social body that renounces bringing new children to this world is a social body that demonstrates to have no hope in future. And it's a challenge to take very seriously, identifying a stage-by-stage process that brings together, on one hand, cultural, pre-political, and political topics, and also puts aside easy slogans. Because, you know, if the demographic winter and the continuance of more than 50 years of policy against the family, we can't imagine that in 9 months we'll turn the whole situation around. If everything's going well, in 9 months' time, we'll take a few more steps forward. There have been some concrete signs from our recent laws that have been going through, and Eugenia will talk about this for sure. There are some concrete signs in our fiscal system, and the Vice Minister Maurizio Leo has spoken about this, and has spoken about this recently as well at a recent conference. But as far as our discussion about drugs and the like, let's not imagine that everything can be resolved with incentives. We don't want it to be a subsidiary approach. We're not the Chinese Communist Party that decides one day you're allowed one child and everyone else, and then, you know, later decides, oh, you know what, let's change this, we retract that. For us, being a subsidiary isn't something that should be taken lightly. We take part in the group on subsidiarity that looks at this aspect. And so the subsidiarity approach doesn't mean that inserting the state in the family, but putting families in a situation to conduct their own business, their own affairs as well as possible. The demographic winter and the government's knowingness of this is the greatest crisis that Italy faces nowadays. I use the word crisis, giving to the term the definition which Pope Francis has given to it. And as you all know, he distinguishes crisis from conflict. Conflict is a negative word. Crisis is something that can have positive developments if it becomes an opportunity to build. That was the case for Italy immediately after the war, where after the reconstruction, after the growth of a devastated, destroyed nation, it correlated with demographic growth. The demographic boom, what came in the final moment, the final stages of Italian economic growth in 1964. I find it very useful to read every year the Census report, because it allows us, often in a few words, to get the sense of what matters and what's most important in the Italian social body. And their most recent report, in order to qualify the state and the Italian social body, uses the category of melancholy. This seems like a very poetic, romantic term. What does social impacts does the word melancholy have? What could that mean? And yet it's correct, because melancholy is that kind of bending back on oneself that makes you not look to the future, that makes you just sort of live day by day, but in the worst sense of the term carpe diem, and as such to not want to have children. And so, having considered this, I don't have any aspirations to any kind of dramatic changes to the state here, but the coalition that I have the honor of being a part of encourages, as far as its competency is able, a new policy that should reveal once again the beauty of bringing children into the life, that should to rediscover in a non-scandalous way, to bring back the right of every child to have a father and a mother, that fights for the consideration of maternity as something that shouldn't be sold or rented. We believe that this isn't something scandalous. We fight for this. We fight for the fact that you don't choose children out in a catalogue, picking their colour, or the colour of their eyes, or their features, or how much you can predict them to be tall. We are aware that you could talk about, for real, taking back what's happening when the demographic curve starts to turn upwards again, when it starts to recover, when children start being born into this world again, when every pregnant mother is considered the pinnacle of society. There is the true beginning of a lively, strong society, healthy society. And I'll use an expression of a great Pope, Pius XII, who said, "We shouldn't resign ourselves to the definiteness of history. There's nothing definite." And in fact, the last thing I'll add on, thanking you all very much for paying attention and for your hospitality, is that now in 2023 is the centenary, which I hope won't pass unobserved, and I don't know if you'll speak about it here at the meeting. It's the centenary of the writing by Thomas Eliot of that amazing poem, which is the Desolate Land. In the desolate wasteland, he writes that he hopes you could make the most of its fruit. The wasteland does not bear fruit, and it's arid. It has far fewer children, far more old people. It's the most concrete sign of objective aridity in our society. And all this happens exactly because the roots have been torn out. For us, these roots aren't something confessional. It's not something. They're a piece of historic data that's completely lay, and this is part of the work that the meeting has been doing for decades, and it's a part of us. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Alfredo, and I think that the applause we're hearing now really show that our conversation with you is something where we've learned something quite important, and we've learned something about you as Undersecretary. And so we thank you for coming here. You've mentioned many topics, even with the kind of provocation you've tried to give us, will catalyze some further discussions that we'll dive into over the next few days, and we'll hope to relay back to you what happens. I'd like to close, obviously, thanking everyone who followed here in the meeting and those online, and that there's a possibility to continue supporting the meeting physically or digitally. That red heart that you see on the screen now. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.
civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Chi ha l'energia giusta sceglie di non sprecarla.